These days, there's so much misinformation being spread online about veganism, animal farming, and the climate crisis. Not only by members of the public, that is, but also by public figures as well. So I thought I'd make a video series called The Worst of the Anti-Vegans, where I'll be looking at the most notorious opponents of veganism and finding out what exactly their problem is and if their arguments have any merit. Hey everyone, I hope you're all doing well. Before this video starts, I just want to tell you all the incredibly exciting news, which is that my second book, called How to Argue with a Meat Eater and Win Every Time, is now available for pre-order and is being published by Penguin Random House on December 28th. Now, to find out all about the book, then check out the video that I'm linking in the top corner now. But in essence, my new book lays out all the arguments against veganism and then debunks them one by one. I discuss everything from veganism being racist, anti-indigenous, and ableist to plants are trying to kill us with their anti-nutrients. I tackle regenerative animal agriculture, religion, hunting, insect farming, honey, bivalves, avocados, palm oil, bees being used for crop pollination. I tackle the argument that vegans kill more animals, that plant protein is inferior, that veganism is bad for children, and so many more. But as well as addressing all of the arguments, this book goes deeper than just the arguments themselves. It explores the landscape of discourse around veganism and importantly outlines how to effectively talk about veganism too. I give you my methods and techniques for having more productive and effective conversations. So maybe you're a vegan who wants to become more knowledgeable, confident, and empowered, and to learn all the rebuttals to every argument that you hear from your family members, friends, work colleagues, and indeed everyone else. Or perhaps you want a non-vegan in your life to have a book that directly addresses the arguments that they use. Or perhaps you're a non-vegan watching this video right now who is interested in having their arguments and views challenged, or who is interested in just learning more about veganism. Whoever you are, this book is an accessible, informative, and non-judgmental deep dive into the arguments used against veganism and how to respond to them effectively. So to pre-order your copy, head to the link in my description, and if you do pre-order, then thank you so much. Pre-ordering makes such a huge difference to the success of the book, so thank you to all of you who do pick up a copy. Now, there are actually a limited number of signed copies available, but they do sell out fast, so if you want a signed copy, then make sure to order it now. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it, and I hope you're excited about the book because I'm so excited that you can now pre-order it, and I cannot wait for it to be published. But with all that being said, let's get back to the video at hand, and importantly, let's talk about Jordan Peterson. So in this video, we'll be looking at Jordan Peterson, the Canadian psychologist and self-imposed carnivore who quit his job as a full-time professor at the University of Toronto so that he could tell you to clean your room and make your own bloody bed.
It's obvious that the last thing our tyrannical, idiot, panicked, virtue-signaling governments should be doing is directing their demented attention toward regulating what people serve at their tables. But because meat has also been deemed yet something else that is destroying the planet, the woke narcissists of compassion are already insisting that people eat less of it. Plants and bugs for you and your children, peasants. And the sooner you get accustomed to it, or else, the better.
Now, is it just me, or has Jordan Peterson turned into a real-life sleep paralysis demon? He's just sat at the end of your bed staring at you, waiting for you to notice him so he can scare you to death with his hyperbole and pseudoscience.
Plants and bugs for you and your children, peasants.
Wake up, woke moralists. By the time sleep paralysis Peterson has finished with you, you'll wish he was Freddy Krueger instead.
Up yours, woke moralists.
I mean, where to start? He's going on a tirade against government healthy eating guidelines here, but I wouldn't blame you for not knowing, since he shrouds his point in a lot of jargon to make it sound convincing in the absence of a credible argument. And eating fruits and vegetables makes you a peasant? I mean, come on, have we really been transported back to the Dark Ages? And I must have also missed the government guidelines that show that you should eat 3 to 4 servings of bugs a day. There are no such guidelines. Right off the bat, he is is just peddling absolute nonsense. And yet sadly, people continue to treat him as if he is an intellectual in this field. But sadly, he's more like a literal child throwing a tantrum because they're being told to eat more vegetables and less chicken nuggets. And notice how he throws in "or else" at the end, as if to suggest that there is some malignant vegan presence that is going to punish you for eating meat. What he's trying to do is discredit the plant-based movement and create doubt about its integrity by laughably linking it with some sort of New World Order conspiracy. Sadly, this is a recurring motif that many anti-vegans resort to when they have no credible argument to make against veganism.
Let's turn our attention to the claim that animal husbandry and the meat it produces cheaply enough for everyone to afford is unsustainable. For a moment, because we haven't yet dispensed with enough moralizing and authoritarian stupidity.
Ah yes, what a stupid and ridiculous claim it is that an industry which relies on approximately $30 billion of taxpayers' money per year just to stay alive is unsustainable, financially and otherwise. And that's just in the US. Does he seriously think that animal farmers have achieved these low prices on their own, through the free market, through hard work? No, of course they haven't. Meat is the price it is because governments have been propping it up with subsidies and price fixing since the 1930s. To give you an idea of just how distorted our food system has actually become, it's estimated that a pound of hamburger meat, which costs around $5 today, would actually cost about $30 without government subsidies. So it's unbelievably ironic that Jordan is trying to criticize the state's influence on our food system while praising something that is literally the product of state intervention. It just goes to show how little he really knows what it is that he's talking about, especially considering he is someone who apparently only eats red meat. So good job, Jordan. You don't have a clue what it is you're talking about. In fact, it's estimated that in the UK, without subsidies that is, cattle and sheep farmers would make a loss of over £16,000 per year. In essence, the industry he's trying to protect is only able to exist like it does because of the scary government actually helping it. Ironically, if the government didn't involve itself in our food system, well, we'd be eating a lot more plants and fewer animals.
Remember what happened the last time that government agencies applied their tender mercy to determining what the people they serve should consume? We were offered the much vaunted food pyramid, telling us to eat 6 to 11 servings of grains and carbohydrates a day, with protein and fat at the pinnacle, something to be indulged in with comparative rarity, if indeed necessary at all. That all turned out to be wrong, and not just a little wrong, but so wrong that it might as well have been not just wrong, but a veritable anti-truth, something as wrong as it could possibly get. The food pyramid was brought into being not least by the US Department of Agriculture, that is, by marketers, not scientists or nutritionists, with no shortage whatsoever of lobby efforts by those whose products ended up being promoted.
First off, there hasn't been a food pyramid in over a decade. It was replaced by something called MyPlate in the US in 2011, and it clearly shows that grains and protein have been given an almost equal weighting. So it's a veritable anti-truth to say that dietary guidelines recommend people rarely eat protein, if at all, meaning the entire premise of his video is actually false. And just to be clear, I'm not trying to defend the US Department of Agriculture here. They do, after all, aggressively market meat and dairy. I mean, the USDA literally has checkoff programs where they work with the animal farming industries to promote their products to consumers. But come on, Jordan, if you're going to criticize something, at least get your facts right and criticize it for substantiated reasons. Don't just spew some utter drivel. The USDA literally encourages people to eat meat, and you're misrepresenting the food guidelines. Also, this spiel is based on a simplified understanding about how food actually works. Protein is not a distinct category of food that can only be found in a handful of animal products. In fact, there is protein in all the foods that we eat, just obviously in varying degrees. For example, there is protein in beans, even though beans are also a source of carbohydrates. There's also protein in avocados, which are obviously a good source of fats. Nutrition is actually a very complex issue, hence why people dedicate their entire careers to studying it. But no, Jordan Peterson, the psychologist, knows better.
The dietary recommendation to prioritize carbohydrates produced a veritable epidemic of obesity and diabetes, resulting in what has been deemed by reliable researchers as one of the worst public health disasters of all time. dooming almost the entire Western population to a lifetime of catastrophic chronic health problems. 42% of Americans are obese. Another almost equally large percentage are overweight. At least a third are in the early or later stages of diabetes, which is an exceptionally serious disease. $1.7 trillion is spent annually on chronic illness in the US. And the rise in such illness and cost is directly associated with the beginning of the godforsaken top-down dietary guidelines that set us all on a carbohydrate-heavy dietary pathway.
Seriously, when is the last time anyone consulted the official dietary guidelines before writing their shopping list or going out for a meal? Last time I checked, you can walk into a supermarket and buy whatever you want. Dietary guidelines are just not being enforced in the authoritarian manner that Jordan is suggesting. And actually, data shows that almost 3/4 of American adults do not even know what the official guidelines are. On top of that, a systematic review of adherence to food-based dietary guidelines across different countries, with the majority of the studies coming from the US, found that the consumption of grains was actually below recommendations, while the consumption of animal proteins, particularly red meat, exceeded those recommendations. So this is actually the complete opposite of what it is that Jordan is trying to claim. Literally the complete opposite. And by Jordan's logic, surely vegans who tend to consume more of their daily calories through carbohydrates than other dietary groups should have the highest rates of obesity and diabetes. But no, they actually have the lowest. That's strange. In fact, studies of vegan populations show they have up to 78% reduced risk of developing diabetes and have the highest amount of disease-fighting biomarkers when compared to meat eaters and indeed vegetarians. But hey, don't let science get in the way of your identity politics and dogmatism, Jordan. Plus, when you look at the diets of the healthiest and longest living areas of the world, also known as the blue zones, well, what do you find? Well, actually, a 95 to 100% plant-based diet, very high in carbohydrates and very low or completely absent in animal fats. In fact, 65% of what people eat in these blue zones comes from complex carbs like whole grains and beans. Now, it is important to point out that Jordan does not distinguish between different types of carbohydrates in his video. In other words, he doesn't distinguish between complex carbohydrates, which are of course generally very healthy, and refined carbohydrates, which have had much of their fiber stripped away and are of course far less healthy. So we can only assume that he is grouping all carbohydrates together in general, which is just incredibly oversimplified, not to mention misleading. He's basically not differentiating between eating sweet potatoes and eating donuts. So if the obesity crisis is not the fault of food guidelines, which the vast majority of people don't know and don't adhere to, or the fault of complex carbohydrates, then well, what is it? Well, of course, it's far more likely to be because of the explosion of super cheap, heavily marketed, calorie-dense, and ultra-processed foods. You know, things like maybe McDonald's and KFC perhaps. People like eating these tasty, convenient foods and companies love selling them to people, which is why we've ended up with a system which encourages the overconsumption of junk food, which yes, of course, is high in refined carbohydrates, but also is incredibly high in saturated fat and is predominantly animal-based. The bottom line here is that Jordan is misrepresenting the food pyramid and also making claims which are very simply put, unsubstantiated and misleading. But go on, Jordan, do tell us more.
There have been, in addition, dozens of studies debunking the claim that red meat causes disease. The Pure study, P-U-R-E, published in the journal Lancet in 2017, analyzing 140,000 individuals from 18 countries, revealed that, quote, higher carbohydrate intake, not meat and fat, note, was associated with an increased risk of total mortality, and that, quote, higher saturated fat intake was associated with lower risk of stroke. Lower. That is exactly the opposite of what we have been told by the beneficial centralizing agents who task themselves with determining what we, as sovereign and responsible individuals, should put in our mouths. So the health benefits of a pure vegetarian and vegan diet are dubious at best.
When you look at the totality of research on the subject of red meat causing disease, there is far, far more evidence that it does than doesn't. That's why the World Health Organization classified red meat as a probable carcinogen and processed meat as a carcinogen. They didn't just review 1 or 2 studies, they reviewed 800 different studies, not just the handful or so that Jordan is using to create his clearly biased viewpoint. And ironically, the peer study he cites is one of the most contested nutrition studies out there. So let's go through some of the issues that other researchers have pointed out with the paper. Now, like Jordan, this study also makes the mistake of not differentiating complex from simple carbohydrates, again leading to oversimplified conclusions based on things like total carbohydrate intake. Strangely though, they do differentiate between different types of fat, like saturated, monounsaturated, and polyunsaturated. So the way they classify and interpret nutrient intakes is obviously not thorough or consistent, which is strange. Another issue is that extremely high carbohydrate intake could be an indicator of a nutrient-deficient poverty diet, as countries with the highest carbohydrate intake also happen to have the lowest income. Now, what this means is that the finger is being pointed solely at carbohydrates when access to and quality of things like healthcare, food in general, water, and hygiene will also play a part as well. So it's very difficult to separate the effects of diet from poverty and undernutrition. Of course, people who don't have access to good healthcare or clean, fresh water will also suffer health consequences as a result. And this study sadly just hasn't made enough effort to factor in these variables. The peer study even had findings which contradicted its own conclusions, which is never a good sign. The issue is not that we are eating too little meat and fat, as Jordan would like to have us believe that is, but that we're eating too little fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and legumes. And the scientific consensus on this is about as strong as it is for climate change. But then again, Jordan doesn't really believe in that either. So what hope have we got?
He says, well, we don't have one problem, carbon dioxide, which is, I don't even think it's clear that carbon dioxide is actually a problem, but we can leave that aside. That'll get me in trouble with the College of Psychologists again.
And now let's talk about dubious evidence for a moment. Jordan Peterson is a carnivore. He actually only eats red meat and salt, apparently. So what great evidence does he use to support this position, considering the evidence around a plant-based diet is apparently so dubious?
A study was released that was published by Harvard epidemiologists. I think they were epidemiologists. They did a retrospective analysis of 2,400 people who were on the carnivore diet for 6 months. It was the only scientific paper I ever read where the surprise of the authors was evident in the manner in which they wrote. Because what they showed was that radical weight loss first. So that was pretty much experienced by all the participants. 90% reduction in all self-reported disease symptoms. All. Enhanced well-being and decrease in suffering. And that pretty much covered the territory.
So what's this great piece of evidence that he's citing then? Well, the researchers went on social media and found pro-carnivore groups on places like Facebook and Reddit. And then what they did is they asked 2,000 people who self-identify as carnivores to fill out a questionnaire. Now, astonishingly, shock of all shocks, the questionnaires in pro-carnivore communities came back positive. So throughout all of the meta-analyses, looking at hundreds of thousands of people over the span of decades, throughout the clinical trials and get rid of those randomized controlled studies, throw them all away. Because one study of 2,000 people in the carnivore community who were sent online questionnaires came back mostly positive. And guess what? It's not just me who thinks this sounds dodgy. This following quote actually comes from the authors of the study itself. These findings must be interpreted cautiously in view of several major design limitations. Our survey assessed the perception of individuals following a carnivore diet and did not objectively assess diet, nutrient status, health-related outcomes, or confounding health-associated behaviors. And no physiological or biochemical measurements were obtained. These self-reported data are prone to recall and reporting bias, especially for the pre-diet information. The generalizability of the findings is unknown owing to the existence of selection bias, because individuals who experienced adverse effects or lack of health benefits are likely to have abandoned the diet and would therefore not have been captured in this survey.
It was the only scientific paper I ever read where the surprise of the authors was evident in the manner in which they wrote.
This is the one study that he chose to cite to defend a carnivore diet. That is it. But please, tell us more, Jordan, about all the dubious evidence out there that supports a plant-based diet.
But what of the argument that animal husbandry is killing the planet? According to the National Academy of Sciences, if we eradicated all animal-based agriculture, we'd reduce greenhouse gases by a mere 2.6%. And it is no simple matter, by the way, and perhaps impossible, to manage a diet that is sustainable in the medium to long term by merely dining on plants. Chew on that.
If you're a vegan who is watching this, well, firstly, no, you're not, because you're probably actually dead in the eyes of Jordan Peterson. Because seriously, what he's implying here is that it is too restrictive and difficult to follow a plant-based diet when his diet literally consists of steak, water, and salt.
No, I eat beef and salt and water. That's it. And I never cheat.
And guess what happened when he did cheat? His own diet is so absurdly unhealthy and restrictive that eating some apple cider gave him an existential crisis.
When we restricted our diet and then ate something we weren't supposed to, the reaction to eating what we weren't supposed to was absolutely catastrophic. And we had some apple cider that had sulfites in it, and that was really not good. Like, I was done for a month. It produced an overwhelming sense of impending doom. Oh, I didn't sleep that month. I didn't sleep for 25 days. I didn't sleep at all. I didn't sleep at all for 25 days.
How is that possible?
I'll tell you how it's possible. You lay in bed, frozen in something approximating terror for 8 hours, and then you get up.
You know what, Jordan? I think I'll stick to eating plants. Thank you very much for the advice, though. I mean, if this story is true, something is very, very wrong with Jordan. And if it's not true and he's making it up, well, then something is very, very wrong with Jordan. Oh, and actually, on the point of apples, Jordan himself claims that we evolved colored vision because we are fruit eaters.
Fruit, that's interesting. We have color vision because we were fruit eaters. Our color vision is precisely evolved to detect ripe fruit.
So by his own logic, if we only ate steak like he advocates, well then we would be colorblind. This is the guy we should trust for nutrition advice? Jordan is so constipated with pseudoscience, he desperately needs some fiber just to push it all out. And of course, in regards to animal agriculture's impact on the environment, well, he is just totally cherry-picking evidence yet again. Although it must be said that it's a little bit ironic that someone who doesn't eat fruit would spend so much time cherry-picking, although due to the abundance of evidence in favor of veganism, cherry-picking will always be a preferred pastime for anti-vegans.
Hey everyone, today I thought I'd make a quick video on how to pick cherries.
But all Jordan has done to back up his claims throughout this video is present seriously flawed studies which actually go against the main body of literature and do not reflect reality. The 2% figure that he quotes comes from a study with an insanely flawed methodology. I've actually debunked this study in another video, so check it out if you want to see more. But to sum up, they basically simulate that if we stop farming animals, we would still continue to produce all of their feed. Not only that, but the land that we freed up from no longer farming them, we would use to produce yet more crops. Obviously, this resulted in an overabundance of grains and humans eating a very unbalanced and nutrient-deficient diet consisting mainly of corn, because according to the researchers, humans would eat the diet that we currently feed to farmed animals. But why on earth would we keep growing millions of tons of animal feed if we weren't farming animals? Instead, we could use a fraction of that land to grow fruits, vegetables, and legumes for human consumption instead, and then dedicate the rest of the land that we wouldn't need to rewilding, which would reduce greenhouse gas emissions even further. They also made their calculations, check this out, based on humans eating 4,700 calories, so literally twice the amount that we should. And their calculations were also based on us burning all of the crop residues and processing waste, which would in turn produce carbon dioxide. Why would we eat 4,700 calories, and why would we burn burn the residues and waste from crop production. Instead, we could compost it and use it in the soil to build up organic matter in the soil, or we could turn it into bioenergy, or literally we could do a multitude of other things with it. So not only are we growing way more crops in their modeling, we're actually also burning all of the residue and waste from these crops as well. Simply put, this is not the reality of what would happen. Now, I do not say this lightly, but this piece of research is one of the most atrocious pieces of food-related climate science ever produced. Their calculations just make no sense whatsoever, and they were heavily criticized by the scientific community. But surprise, surprise, the researchers themselves weren't actually climate scientists. It turns out that both authors of this study have links with the animal farming industry. They are animal agriculture scientists. So of course they produced a paper which makes the animal farming industry look less damaging than it actually is. Check this out. Let's say that we actually use the absurd scenarios that they made up. They still found a statistically significant reduction in emissions. In fact, 2.6% of US emissions is the same amount as all the emissions produced by Sweden, Switzerland, and Portugal combined. So even manipulating the data in the ways that they did still shows that a plant-based diet would actually make a significantly positive impact on the planet and the environment. But doesn't that just say it all? Even the most audacious meat industry PR still proves that no longer eating animal products would have a significant benefit. Not even they themselves can hide the truth convincingly. But the reality is, if we actually did stop farming animals, the US would see as much as a 73% reduction in agricultural-related greenhouse gas emissions. And globally, we would reduce food emissions by about 49%. But what dubious evidence is this, you might ask? Well, actually, it comes from the largest and most comprehensive study on the environmental impacts of our food system ever done. A meta-analysis that looked at over 1,500 studies covering close to 40,000 farms in 119 different countries around the world. The lead author even chose to go vegan during the course of the study based on the evidence that he had found. And that is the difference between good science and the rubbish that Jordan Peterson is citing. Because authors of good science change their behavior based on their findings, while authors of bad science change the findings based on their behavior. Chew on that. Jordan is someone who bases his whole persona around freedom and liberty and anti-authoritarianism, yet he is one of the loudest supporters of a government-backed and government-funded industry which literally imprisons living sentient beings, dictates every aspect of their lives, and removes every ounce of freedom that they have. So not only are his ideas intellectually flawed, but sadly they also have victims and real life consequences as well. Now, Jordan also said that animals are not entitled to rights because they cannot shoulder an obligation. In other words, they cannot participate in the complex social contract that structures rights. Thankfully, we don't think it's okay to exploit and harm babies and severely disabled people, even though if we were to use Jordan's logic, we would be justified in doing so. It's almost as if his moral framework is weaker than his climate and health science, which is really saying something. But of course, Jordan isn't concerned with being consistent. He's concerned about preserving his own interests, which include eating steak every day, all whilst paradoxically rallying against victim mentalities whilst positioning himself as a victim of just about everything that you can think of. He's a victim of social media guidelines. He's a victim of the liberal elite. He's a victim of the woke agenda. He's a victim of the shady government. He's a victim of the far left. And now, of course, he's a victim of the nutrition guidelines. He's a victim of environmentalism, and he's a victim of vegans and their animal rights agenda. The only thing Jordan Peterson is a victim of is his arrogance and intellectual shortcomings. He is the literal definition of the Dunning-Kruger effect. A man who thinks he's an expert on issues he very clearly knows absolutely nothing about, and ironically formulates his opinions on these issues based on his identity politics. So, simply put, Jordan Peterson's arguments against veganism are absolutely atrocious. And instead of doing his best impression of a sleep paralysis demon trying to scare us into eating more red meat, he should instead have a couple of blueberries and leave the science to the experts. So that brings us to the end of the video. Thank you all so much for watching it. As always, let me know down below in the comments what you thought about this video. And importantly, let me know what you think about Jordan Peterson's claims regarding veganism, animal rights, and indeed a plant-based diet. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I will see you all in the next video.